Welcome back. Today I'm going to be teaching you guys about how to add a thickness to the body of your animal so that it doesn't look so geometric and has, the proportions of the depth of the animal. So I've kind of wrote down some notes so I don't forget to say things. So basically, the first thing that you're going to do is you have your frontal view of your animal, which this is mine. And what I did is I took the shape of the head and I traced it. I actually cut mine out, but I have another page printed so I could show you. And then I traced it onto cardboard and I cut that out. And then this was basically the widest point of the face because they have basically this round part here. So in my side view image, I could see that the widest point was not necessarily the tallest point. So I placed that, that head piece a little bit lower on the front of the face. So one thing you need to keep in mind is you can't, when you're starting to use the newspaper, you're not going to be adding to the top edge of this or the bottom edge of this because you already have the correct proportion in those measurements. You're going to be adding more to like the sides and the front of like these pieces here, okay? So, the first thing you're going to do, I'm going to remove this. The first thing you're going to do is do the head, and then depending on your animal, you either need to make like one or two parts that are made out of cardboard that create the thickness of the body. So I chose to do like the very middle, the lowest point where the belly hangs, because I could measure that easiest. And then I did the front of the face, and that's kind of all I'm doing, okay? And you have to have these so that you can connect the newspaper to it. The most challenging part, because of the images that we have, is judging some of the thicknesses that are within the belly. So it does take some judging and kind of looking closely at the photographs, or I have been flipping a lot through the images that I have on the website that I provided to see different angles of my animal. So what I determined is that the legs on the back part of the body, the legs stick out the furthest, the arms stick out further in the front, and the belly right here is just a little bit less wide than the legs. So you can see where my legs are here, and the hips are bigger because when I add on the paper, the newspaper, and the paper pulp, this is going to bulk out and get wider. So when I determined that the hips are wider, basically I judged the lowest point, which again is that belly, how thick it was there. So again, it's going to be a little bit more narrow than my hips. So I just made a piece, and I wanted to remind you or go over, it is very important that you cut your slit as high up on the cardboard as possible, or literally you can just split them in two halves and glue them on two sides. Because if you have a lot of height coming up, you're adding, the proportions are not correct at that point. So I'm actually, once I do glue this or tack it on there, I'm probably even gonna cut that down, or I can separate it in two pieces, just like this one. I can do that as well. It's always better to make it smaller because when you're adding on the paper, that's gonna add basically a thickness to it. Another thing you need to keep in mind is that all things are organic and rounded. So when you do cut your sections, you need to curve the edges. So basically just taking an X-Acto knife and just kind of cutting those at a curvature. You also need to keep in mind that all animals, or most animals I should say, are symmetrical. So when you are making your form, you're going to make sure that where you cut the slit is in the center of that form, okay? Let's see. So you're going to be using, the next step after you do that, I'm going to show you how to use the hot glue gun, which is very simple. You don't want to burn yourself, and I'm sure you guys have done this previously. The hot glue is going to be on the countertop in my main room, and you don't need a ton of glue, but I'm just going to put some kind of on that inside layer and place it where it needs to be. Okay, sometimes that'll do the trick. Sometimes you need to add just a tiny bit more to get it on there. You can also use tape, because I do not have, 30 hot glue guns, but we can kind of share. I do have probably 7, so we'll have them plugged up around the room so that, we can kind of take turns using them. Okay, so we're going to be using tape and newspaper and kind of balling up the newspaper to build the thickness in the body and in the neck and in the face a little bit. Actually, the face I'm not going to really add much to. That's going to be more made out of paper pulp because it's a finer detail. Also, with my hands, I'll do a little bit of newspaper to add some width to it. But I don't need to add much. Let me grab one thing to show you guys. So this is an example of the leg with the newspaper on it. And I wanted to show you too, I also added a little piece of cardboard down here so that there is a thickness to build off of for the foot. And that sometimes is really important to do right away, so you don't have to, add on with the newspaper. Okay, so basically I'm just gonna kind of looking at your images, and you can have your computer up with those, that website pulled up. I'm just going to simply kind of tape some stuff on there. And again, it's always good to do less. You can just add more and tape more on as you go. So I know that the widest part on the belly is right here. So I don't want to go much wider than this edge. So this is gradually kind of going to get thicker all the way to the edge. And then from there, the legs are going to be the widest, or the hip area is going to be the widest. So it will actually start coming back out. For the finer details, like showing, the edges of where the leg and the hip kind of come together, that will be something you do in the paper pulp, and you can use the paper mache clay, which is the paper pulp, to kind of define it with a wooden tool. I also know, like from my images, I can see that the neck is not as wide as this head part, but it is fairly wide. So I'm going to be adding to the thickness here. And again, I'm not putting any up here. I'm not putting any down here so that I can get it correct. So I think that's all I'm gonna show you guys for right now. This will be, the most challenging part, because you really have to look at all the pictures to judge the thicknesses of the body sections. Once you have that done, our next step is going to be using the paper pulp to clean up the surface. It's a very thin layer, and it makes it, more organic and natural looking. So that's all I got for you guys. Good luck.